Hey everybody, so it's Holy Saturday now, and I'm going to do my last little bit on Barnaby Rudge. And I've talked before about why Barnaby Rudge was not popular in its own day with regards to not wanting to be reminded of the Gordon Riots specifically in the British market, and of course, America just didn't care. And also that it was very difficult to identify with the main character, Barnaby Rudge. However, there's aspects of the book that are still going to be unpopular with modern audiences, in particular surrounding the mob violence. It's not just that Dickens is very graphic in displaying what kind of violence there was, but he shows, and I don't know, there's a various theories of how mob violence gets started, how it continues, how it persists, and how it ends. But Dickens portrays a very specific sequence of events. First, you have the great crowd, so tens of thousands of people, with the petition, with George Gordon. So Lord Gordon, or they call him Lord George. There's too many ors in there to say comfortably. Anyway, Parliament rebuffs them, don't really accept the petition. And, you know, there's some shouting, there is some-ish rioting, but people disperse, they're concerned of being taken by the officials, the authorities, and it kind of dies down. Dickens portrays the riots as having had various ringleaders, not necessarily Lord Gordon himself, but other people who set the fires, targeted specific Catholic houses and that kind of thing, and maybe that was the case. I don't know, I don't care enough to look it up. That said, whether or not it required leadership to have the mob violence get going and to set off fires of the prison and this, that, and the other, there was definitely power involved in the response to the rioters, specifically an absence of action on the part of the official. So the Lord Mayor of London was shown to be derelict in his duty. Actually, he was called up before Parliament after all the riots for his lack of action. He comes across very, very poorly in this novel. The one thing, I mean, the point at which you can kind of see he doesn't really have any forces of his own. There is kind of a city watch, but it's not a police force. They don't, and they'd be outnumbered by the rioters anyway. So there's not actually a lot he can do. He's actually afraid. He's shown as being almost no different from any other Londoner in not wanting to shelter any of the Catholics. And I want to say, Dickens shows the main Catholic character, Mr. Haredale, looking for help, and there's also the Catholic vintner. They show up at the Lord Mayor's house. Haredale has a different reason. He doesn't want protection. He wants someone thrown into prison. In any case, the Lord Mayor at one point is wringing his hands like, why did you guys have to be Catholic? Oh, you know, why can't you guys just stop being Catholic? Then the mob won't come after you, which of course was partially false. There were plenty of non-Catholics targeted once the mob violence got started. In any case, the Lord Mayor basically did nothing. And so the riots continued on for a few more days. What it took, and I don't know if they actually read the Riot Act, which is a real thing. So the Riot Act was something, and I can't remember exactly if it was like James I or James II time that Parliament passed this. You read the Riot Act basically because there's mob violence going on, and it's generally London. And if you don't disperse, you know, the British Army or whoever the authorities are can and will shoot you. It's basically a declaration of martial law, and there's additional penalties for rioters, and of course this is why so many got executed. In any case, evidently the Riot Act was not read. Again, this is partly the Lord Mayor and not following through on what he should have done, supposedly. It took official violence, that is the British Army, coming out and, again, this is official violence versus mob violence, and that's what it took to end this. So think of modern times and mob violence now, which of course still occurs. It might not be to the extent we see now because the officials, well, let's see, maybe in some cases the officials do let people run riot. what it took for the riot to end was official force to come out. It did not die. Well, it was kind of dying. Again, I don't know how much to trust Dickens on this score. He was writing 50 plus years after the fact. 60 years after the fact. So he may have had his own interpretation that's not necessarily based on history. Fair enough. So the British Army did come out. Some people were shot. Some people were executed for the mob violence. So think of today, and we do get mob violence now, though some people might be underwhelmed by the size of the mobs, depending. We know about, in the late 60s, about various riots in the U.S. We have the Yellow Jackets protests, but in some places just outright riots, and you have riots elsewhere. And in general, there is official response. There's not official violence too much. They might throw tear gas, but in general, they're not trying to kill or hurt people. But they're showing that, sometimes that's what it takes to, shoot a few people to encourage the others, as an example. This is not something people like to think about. This is, I guess, the libertarian weak point. You don't want all this armed force, and government is the official force. But that's what it takes when things get out of hand. The first thing of government is to keep proper order. And if proper order cannot be maintained, the government has lost credibility. It has lost legitimacy. And so government will react in some way or another. If you just go hide in the basement and hope for the violence to pass, maybe it'll work, but people are not going to be happy. You might create a different mob. Something to think about. It's not a popular, as I said, it's not a popular book now, or it was then. Next book also had a similar problem. Martin Chuzzlewit. It's my second favorite Dickens book. And I will talk about that next month, especially the really silly thing that Dickens tried to do to save that novel, which was very stupid. Anyway, bye.